In a previous video in this series on how to learn, I explained the essential first step when learning something new. Understand the terrain by getting the big picture. Doing so will help you understand what topics you need to learn and will make your learning process far more efficient. Then, in the last video, I talked about how to learn effectively. And for most people, the attention to the learning process would stop there. After all, what else do you need? Well, you need a critical piece to the learning puzzle: how to retain what you've gained. You need specific and concrete tactics to help you retain previously learned knowledge. That way, you'll be ready, not rusty, when the day comes for you to recall previously learned material a few weeks or months down the road. Retaining what you've gained is the topic of this video. It's also the last step in our 3-part learning framework, Principles of Learning. Principles of Learning is a free guide that my husband Paul and I created in order to make the learning process efficient and effective. It's a hands-on practical guide from the learner's perspective, and you can access it for free at howtolearneffectively.com. Now, let's dive into how to retain what you've gained. Most people learn topics sequentially. A math student learns exponents, then fractions, then decimals, and so on. But there's a problem with this approach. Soon comes the day when you need to recall previously learned material, but you can't, at least not easily. You've forgotten what you've learned. You've lost your edge. You've also wasted a ton of time and effort along the way. And this is why it's essential to proactively retain what you gain. It's a small investment in your future self. Otherwise, you risk decaying skills and a lot of frustration as you spend more time relearning previously learned concepts. There are a couple different ways you can retain what you've gained, and today I'm going to share 2 of them. Let's dive into it. Consider an exam that you crammed for in school. Now, cramming might help you get through the midterm the next day, point out the authors of the book Make It Stick. But you'll probably forget the material by the time the final exam rolls around. In other words, spending a big chunk of time learning or practicing a skill might help you in the short term. But if you're looking for longer-term retention, you're better off spacing out your practice over a period of time and mixing it up. First, let's talk about spaced practice. It simply means to practice over a period of time. Instead of pulling an all-nighter to cram for an exam, space out your study time over the course of the semester. Here's another example. Instead of solving math problems for 7 hours on Monday, you space your practice out 1 hour every day, each day of the week. Second, mix up your practice by interleaving. Interleaving simply means to practice 2 or more topics or skills during a single practice session. A basketball player, for example, alternates among different shots in basketball: free throws, 3-point shots, and right-handed and left-handed layups. This is in contrast to sequentially working on each type of shot, one at a time. For example, shoot 15 free throws, then 15 3-point shots, and finally 15 right-hand layups and 15 left-hand layups. You can also apply this interleaving idea to intellectual pursuits. Say you're learning pre-algebra. Specifically, you're learning about square roots. Well, as you set out to practice today, mix it up, interleave your learning. So your practice session today might look like this. You begin by solving a couple fraction, decimal, and inequality-related problems. These are concepts you've already learned about. Then, you work through a couple square root problems, which is the concept you're trying to get better at and learn about. Finally, you conclude your practice by working through a decimal and a ratio problem, which are 2 other topics you have previously learned about. So you might be thinking to yourself, using spaced practice and interleaving takes some time. And you're right, it does take some time and effort to use these tactics, but the benefits are well worth it. First, you'll stay sharp with previously learned material when you space out your practice and interleave your learning, which has been our experience. Plus, we've also found that spacing out your practice and interleaving your learning are a great way to pick up the details. This makes a lot of sense because you know a lot more now than you did a couple weeks ago, for example. You'll see things differently, probably better than you did when you first set out to learn a topic when you revisit it repeatedly over time. The second benefit is that you'll be prepared. Interleaving in particular will help you be prepared for the unexpected. Rarely does life come at you predictably in a sequential order. Rather, you need to be ready for anything. Interleaving can help prepare you for this very real-world scenario. The third benefit is that you'll become more adaptable and versatile. Say you're trying to get better at cooking. You could focus in on one particular meal and make that meal over and over and over again. Maybe that meal is spaghetti with red sauce and meatballs. So you may be tempted to prepare this meal every time you have guests come over. But focusing on this one meal, and only this one meal, can be problematic. What if you invite a guest for dinner who doesn't eat meat or who doesn't eat tomatoes? Well, then you're kind of stuck. It's far better to have a variety of tools in your toolbox and to pick the right tool for the job based on the situation at hand. And a way to have reliable tools in your toolbox is to space out your practice and interleave it. Perhaps the biggest benefit of all, when you retain what you gain, you don't have to spend more time relearning concepts you've already learned, which is time-consuming and frustrating. So we've covered a lot of ground here in this mini-series on how to learn. We talked about how the first step in learning something new starts with understanding the terrain. Then we talked about how to learn effectively, and finally, retaining what you've gained along the way. So the takeaway is this. Learning something new is a beautiful thing, but the process itself shouldn't be so ambiguous and complicated. Hopefully, this series on how to learn and our Principles of Learning framework, which you can access at howtolearneffectively.com, have added clarity to this process. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this series. Please leave a comment below and tell us about your learning journey. In the meantime, make it an effective day and happy learning.